Good morning. This is the pre-proposal webinar for the Innovative Teacher and Principal Residency Programs Grant Competition run through the Pennsylvania Department of Education. Today is June 11th, 2018. The purpose of the webinar is to review the Innovative Teacher and Principal Residency Programs Grant Application Guidelines, to review the grant application requirements and procedures, to provide links to resources, and to answer questions that were submitted in writing in advance of the webinar. My name is Stephanie Stauffer, and I am in the issuing office. I am the person to whom questions will be addressed, and I'll shepherd the process of the grant proposal through the awarding. My contact information will be provided at the end of this set of slides. This set of slides will also be provided at the Pennsylvania Department of Education's website for the Innovative Teacher and Principal Residency Programs Grant, and a transcript of this recording will also be provided. In today's webinar, we're providing information only. There's no live question and answer. Written questions may be entered into the chat box. These will be collected and answered in a document that will be posted to the grant website. Chat will also be monitored for those who have technical difficulties. I'm going to give you an overview of the grant here. The purpose of the grant is to develop and promote teacher and principal preparation pipelines that ensure the most talented and diverse candidates enter and persevere in the teaching and school leadership professions. You can refer to Pennsylvania's Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA Consolidated State Plan, for more information on the state's policy. The grant is also to fund expansion and/or implementation of innovative full-year clinical residency programs, and to fund the planning of new innovative full-year clinical residency models. The funding for the grant comes from the Federal Every Student Succeeds Act, Title II, Part A, set-aside funds for state activities to support effective instruction. Approximately $2 million are available for grants this year, and this is the first year of what is expected to be a multi-year competitive grant program. Awards for this funding in future years are specifically contingent upon the appropriation of funds by the federal government, by the Pennsylvania General Assembly, and they're contingent upon a fully executed contract with the applicant. We're going to continue the overview of the grant. The grant will fund two types of residency models. The first is the teacher. The programs that will be funded occur at the baccalaureate and post-baccalaureate level. And these are programs that are provided by IHEs, institutions of higher ed, such as colleges and universities, or alternative educator preparation programs in Pennsylvania that are developing classroom teachers in the instructional certificates. We also fund a residency model for principals and school leaders. These are all post-baccalaureate programs, and they can be provided by institutions of higher ed or alternative educator preparation program providers. For these two types of targets, two residency targets, the instructional and the school leadership, we have grant application guidelines that contain types of awards and award amounts. First is the implementation and expansion grant. That type of award has a maximum amount of $750,000. And then there's a planning grant, which may be targeting either the instructional certificates or the principal or school leader certificates. And the planning grants have a maximum award of $75,000. We want you to note that applicants may apply for either grant type and for either principal or teacher residency models. And you're not applicants are not restricted to one type. Applicants may apply for more than one grant award. Eligible applicants are those that are current PDE-approved educator preparation program providers. These are IHEs, colleges and universities, and alternative providers that are approved by the Pennsylvania Department of Education. and operating already. Applicants must also partner with an LEA, a local education agency, and at least one of the partners must be a high-need LEA. According to the grant proposal guidelines, the definition of high-need LEA is an LEA with schools that have 1, high rates of minority students or high rates of students in poverty, or 2, schools that can demonstrate chronic multiple teacher shortages in special education, STEM subjects, those are science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or other state-identified or local shortage areas. An LEA is high need if it meets one of the following 3 criteria, and it need only meet one of the 3, not all 3. So the first criterion is that it enrolls a high percentage of minority students in the district and or in a school within the district. The second criterion is that it enrolls a high percentage of economically disadvantaged students in the district or in a school within the district. And the third criterion is that the district or a school within the district has documented educator shortages. And these may be state-identified shortages and or locally identified shortages. We have provided some resources on these slides. The links that you see in front of you are live for documenting these high needs areas. So to document high need relating to high rates of minority students, you can visit PDE's Enrollment Reports and Projections page, which contains a link to the Public Schools Enrollments 2016-2017 file. This presents enrollment data by LEA and by race or ethnicity as reported by Pennsylvania LEAs in the Pennsylvania Information Management System, or PIMS. For your proposal, if you want to document high need relating to high rates of students in poverty, you can visit PDE's Loan Cancellation Low Income page. This contains a link to the 2016-2017 Public Schools Percent Low Income file, which presents percentages of students in Pennsylvania schools who come from low-income families. These are presented by LEA and by school. Low income in this case is defined by the federal government under the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA. If, for your program proposal purposes, you need to document high need relating to educator shortages, Pennsylvania subject area shortages, and the LEAs identified by Pennsylvania as having teacher shortages within those subject area shortages are listed in a document titled Teacher Shortage Areas Nationwide Listing for 1990-1991 through 2017-2018, published in May of 2017 by the U.S. Department of Education. This document can be accessed via a link on the U.S. Department of Education's teacher shortage page, and that link is in the slide set. Grant applicants may document local needs in support of proposed partners and local shortage areas that are not identified on these lists. We're going to move to talk about the requirements, the required elements, and the priority elements that must and can be included in the implementation and expansion type grants. The minimum required elements are the following. The grant must include a full year of clinical practice for residents teaching or leading alongside an expert mentor teacher or principal school leader, principal or school leader mentor. And this can be in a single school year or distributed across academic years. The grant proposal must include relevant coursework that's tightly integrated with clinical practice. The proposal must include expert mentor teachers or principals or school leaders recruited and trained to co-teach or co-lead with residents. The grant must provide for financial support that eliminates or significantly reduces financial burden for residents. The grant must require strong partnerships between one or more high-need LEAs and educator preparation programs. And the grant must address an increase in diversity among teachers and/or leaders in the educator pipeline. Successful applicants must use the funding to support these required deliverables and expected outcomes. And we'll remind you that current approved educator preparation programs, both traditional IHEs and alternative programs, may apply for up to $750,000 in competitive funding for these grants. Those were the required elements. Now we move to the priority elements. Priority consideration will be given to applicants addressing these elements. The priority elements include a proposal that provides for residents to be incentivized or required to commit to teaching or leading in the partner LEA upon completion of the program. Another priority element would be the selection of high-ability residents to meet demonstrated hiring needs in specified shortage areas. A third priority element is ongoing mentoring and support for residents after they successfully complete the program and earn their certificates. And finally, a final priority element is inclusion of a minimum cohort of 3 to 5 teacher residents in teaching school settings that model evidence-based practices with diverse learners. These include English language learners, students with disabilities, gifted students, and/or students with low literacy levels, designed to help teachers and/or principal residents learn to teach and lead. We'll move along to the planning grants, and we'll remind you that the planning grants are expected to be implemented, plan activities that will be implemented by 2019-2020, and that planning grants may receive awards in the maximum of $75,000. Successful applicants must use funding to support these required deliverables and expected outcomes. And for the planning grants, priority will be given to teacher preparation programs in good standing that are housed within IHEs, that is colleges and universities, 4-year undergraduate programs in partnership with 1 or more high-need LEAs. Other types of programs can apply, but those are the priorities for this type of grant. The minimum required elements that the grant proposal must address are the following. The grantees will develop a program design, they'll develop plans for the launch, and they'll develop implementation plans to establish residency experiences in partnership with at least 1 high-need LEA. These plans must be informed by data, that is, through a needs assessment completed in collaboration with all the partners, the potential residents, and other relevant individuals and institutions. The second required element is that plans must address the minimum requirements for residency models identified under the implementation expansion grants described above and previously in this presentation. And the plans must describe a multi-year timeline for how the program will build and expand to address priority elements over time. The grant proposal plans must also address evaluation and evidence-based continuous improvement of both the individual residents who participate in the programs as well as the residency model itself. We want you to note that planning grant recipients will receive priority consideration for implementation and expansion grants in future years, subject to the availability of funding. Planning grant recipients must incorporate input from the LEA partners as an integral part of the planning process. There are priority elements attached to planning grants as well, and you see these on this slide. The first refers us back to the priority elements that were implemented, that were identified under the implementation and expansion grants as previously described in this presentation. Then sustainability is a priority element, and this includes use of existing institutional resources, which could be in-kind, they could be financial resources, and so on, to support long-term implementation. Another priority element is improving the diversity among participating cohorts of residents, including efforts to include underrepresented candidates, who do include but are not limited to low-income student residents, residents of color, and residents who are first-generation college students. Another priority element is to provide opportunities to build skills and experiences needed to effectively serve diverse learners in pre-K to 12, including students with disabilities, English learners, gifted students, and students with low literacy levels. Again, priority consideration will be given to applicants who address these elements. We'll move on to talk about the application timeline, always remembering that these dates are subject to change by the Pennsylvania Department of Education. The grant guidelines were released on May 14th, 2018. And written questions for the pre-proposal webinar were due to be submitted by May 29, 2018. The pre-proposal webinar was conducted on June 11, 2018. The intent to submit document, which states that an institution intends to submit a proposal but does not firmly commit an institution to doing that, is due to the issuing office, that is to my office, by close of business on June 15, 2018. The applications, the competitive applications, are due to the issuing office by close of business, that's 5:00 p.m. on Wednesday, June 27th, 2018. That's June 27th, 2018 at 5:00 p.m. The application packets will then be reviewed and scored by a review panel from June 28th to July 2nd, 2018. And by July 9th, the grant recipients will be notified, and indeed all applicants will be notified of the status of their grant proposals. The applications will be submitted via email to the point of contact in the issuing office. That's me, and again, my information appears at the end of the set of PowerPoint slides. Note that these dates had been revised as of June 1st, 2014. We'll move on to the operations timeline. The Department of Education will meet with grant recipients on July 23rd, 2018. Grant award contracts will be prepared after that and returned to PDE by July 27th, 2018. And then we want to remind everybody that these funds that support this grant competition, the Title II Part A funds, will expire for the 2018-2019 grant on September 30th of 2019. Awardees will be expected to submit quarterly evaluation reports to the issuing office, and those will be due at the end of each quarter. That is December 31st, 2018, March 31st, 2019, and July 31st, 2019. Quarterly telephone calls will also be held between the awardees and the Pennsylvania Department of Education at the end of each quarter or by the end of each quarter by December 31st, 2018, March 31st, 2019, and July 31st, 2019. Note that these dates have been revised as of June 1st, 2018. There's a closeout timeline associated with these grants, and the final completion report will be due to PDE by November 30th, 2019, along with the program evaluation. The program evaluation does not have to be performed by an external evaluator, but the grant proposal must include and address how the activities will be evaluated. And that evaluation report is due November 30th, 2019. There's an audit report that is also due on June 30th, 2020. We want to remind you that awards for this funding in future years are specifically contingent upon the appropriation of funds by the federal government and by the Pennsylvania General Assembly, and they're also contingent upon a fully executed contract between PDE and the grant recipient. PDE does provide a number of grant documents, including the grant guidelines, the grant requirements, and some supporting documents. These are posted on the website associated with the Innovative Teacher and Principal Residency Programs grant. And we have in the PowerPoint slides links to the two documents that you see on the screen in front of you, the grant application guidelines and the grant application requirements. We'll go over the guidelines and requirements on the following pages, but just to let you know, the first document announces the grant competition, provides foundational support for the grant's goals, describes the types of grants that are available, and outlines both required elements and priority elements on which the proposals will be judged. Those have been covered previously in this presentation. The second document outlines the steps that must be taken in order to apply for this grant, describes how to assemble the documents in support of the grant, and provides information on how proposals will be selected for funding. We'll move on to talk about the second document in the next portion of this presentation. There are 7 sections of the grant application. The Pennsylvania Department of Education asks that you submit these as PDF files to the issuing office, that is my office. And where you see links on these slides, we provide templates. If you don't see a link, you are asked to produce your own document. So the first element is a cover page, which will list application contents and page numbers. And then you'll provide a project abstract. This is a form that you're going to fill out. It's called Rider B or PDE 3118, and there's a link to it from the slides and also on the grant webpage. This section gathers information related to the specific project, its measurable goals, objectives, activities, and expected outcomes. This form asks questions related to who will lead the partnership activities, what the funding levels are projected to be, what are the anticipated starting and ending dates, what are the projected number of participants planned for the statewide partnership or the regional or local partnership, and in addition to listing all partners, that is providers, LEAs, and so on, the abstract will include a table that connects the project activities to the project goals and individual objectives. The third section of the application is the document that is an agreement to participate in an innovative teacher and or principal residency program. It's a standard form, PDE 3668, and there's a link to that here on this slide and also on the website. Each partner must sign an agreement that describes the roles and responsibilities of all partners. Other documents, such as agreements from intermediate units and letters of endorsement, do not satisfy this requirement. The fourth section of the application is the acronym definition page and explanations of projects referenced in the narratives. We ask you to supply this so that you can define an acronym or tell us about a project, say an ongoing project that you plan to build out. Provide those explanations here in section 4, and then you can use the acronym or the project name without explanation throughout the remainder of your application. The remaining sections of the application are explained on this page. First, number 5, we've got the 1-year budget projection. We do supply a template, a spreadsheet, if you would like to use that. Otherwise, you may supply your own version, but it must include the same information that's included on that PDE provided form. So you will need to take a look at that spreadsheet under number 5. We ask you to supply number 6, draft evaluation instruments where they are available that you intend to use to measure the effectiveness of the goals, objectives, and activities of the partnership. We understand for a planning grant, for example, that those evaluation instruments may not be available, but where they are available, include them. And finally, the proposal narrative will include a sequence of sections listed on the following slide. The proposal narrative is your chance to explain and in more detail all of the elements of your plan. The proposal narrative, we want to point out, is limited to 20 double-spaced pages prepared in 11-point Arial font. So we're going to ask you to let that be a guide to help you determine how detailed your proposal narrative needs to be. You'll just restrict it to 20 double-spaced pages in 11-point Arial font. We have 8 sections in the proposal narrative. These include the executive summary, the local needs assessment, which includes supporting data and a description of your cooperative planning among your partners. The proposal narrative also includes Part C, the program design and deliverables, Part D, the action plan, Part E, the sustainability plan, Part F, the program evaluation, Part G, the dissemination of project results and other information or your plan for dissemination, and Part H, your budget narrative. We'll go into each one of these sections in more detail in the following slides. In the executive summary, you're going to state the type of grant that's being applied for, whether it's an implementation expansion grant or a planning grant. You're going to supply the certification preparation programs to be involved in the grant project. If instructional certification programs are involved, For each one of these, you're going to state whether the program level is undergraduate and/or post-baccalaureate. And we want to let you know, for the purposes of this application, post-baccalaureate programs include those that are offered at the master's and/or doctoral levels. All of those are considered by the Pennsylvania Department of Education to be post-baccalaureate programs because they require a baccalaureate degree upon program entry. The third part of the executive summary, Part C, is to state the goal of the statewide partnership, your regional or local partnership. And you're going to refer to item 6 in your project abstract, that document that formed another section, a different section of the grant proposal. At Part D, you're going to list measurable objectives, again referring to the project abstract or in accord with the project abstract. You're going to list standards or benchmarks to determine effectiveness of the program, and you're going to summarize the instructional services and supports to be provided by the program. And the last part of the executive summary is to list anticipated project results, including the projected number of residents, cooperating teachers, school leaders, other teachers, principals, and higher ed coaches and/or supervising faculty from each partner LEA and/or IHE or alternative provider that will participate in the current funding cycle. And also list the anticipated impact of each partner participating in partnership activities. In your local needs assessment, you're going to A, describe the strengths and weaknesses in each partner's existing clinical experiences for student teachers and/or principal interns, being certain to address the ease with which student teachers and/or principal interns are placed in LEAs. You're going to address the preparation of cooperating teachers and/or school leaders and their ability to coach student teachers and/or principal interns. Part B of your local needs assessment, you're going to identify which certification preparation programs have been chosen as a focus for this grant proposal, why these programs were selected, and how teachers and/or school leaders other than cooperating teachers or cooperating school leaders will participate. Part C, you'll describe and document local conditions that substantiate the need for partner LEAs to participate in the grant activities. Part D, you'll describe the collaborative process that was used to plan and used to decide how partnerships would implement residency grant activities. And Part E, you'll describe the composition of the preparation program candidates in terms of diversity, and you'll discuss any documented need to increase diversity among the candidates. In the next part of the program narrative, the program design and deliverables, your grant proposal will A, describe how competencies, knowledge, and skills associated with professional practice in the instructional or leadership certification subject area will be incorporated into coursework. Part B, you'll summarize expected project outcomes, the benefits provided to cooperating teachers and/or school leaders, other teachers and/or school leaders, principals, students, higher ed faculty, student teachers and/or principal interns, and their instructional and/or leadership coaches. Part C, you're going to describe how representatives from both the teacher and/or principal preparation program and local education agency will support program participants as they complete their preparation coursework while they participate in the year-long residency student teaching or year-long principal intern programs. Part D, you're going to describe evidence-based pedagogical methods that will be incorporated into certification programs. Part E, you'll describe the incentives and flexibilities that will be incorporated to encourage residents to participate in these programs. And Part F, you'll describe the supports and retention strategies that will be implemented with residency program participants. The program design and deliverables are continued on this slide. Part G, you'll describe how the partnership anticipates improving practice-based clinical sites for future teachers and/or school leaders. Part H, you'll describe the partnership's capacity to design a year-long residency program that culminates in a Pennsylvania instructional or principal certificate. Part I, you'll describe the partnership's capacity to strengthen the professional practice of future new teachers and/or principals to accomplish stated goals, objectives, and expected outcomes, including the qualifications of the lead IHEs or alternative providers project director to administer a partnership grant. Part J, you'll describe the strategies that will be employed to address increasing diversity among candidates, if such a need has been identified for the program. Part K, you'll describe how the partnership anticipates supporting residents as they complete certification coursework and the year-long clinical residency. Part L, you'll present a staffing plan, which includes the names and roles of individuals from each partner and an organizational chart, including the names of participating individuals and the partner they represent. And finally, Part M, you'll attach syllabi for the coursework portion of the year-long clinical residency program. And we want you to note that the syllabi are not counted in the 20-page limit for the length of the proposal narrative. So please do keep that in mind. The syllabi are in addition to the 20-page limit that is set on the proposal narrative, which is meant to be provided double-spaced in 11-point Arial font. We do want to also note that for planning grants, provide these elements insofar as possible. Where these are part of the work to be planned, describe the planning goals, the planning process, and the expected outcomes. The next part of the narrative is the action plan. You're going to do 3 things here. You'll develop measurable objectives, activities, and expected outcomes for each required element, and for any priority elements that are incorporated in your proposal. These will also be supplied at item 6 in the project abstract. The second thing that you'll do for the action plan is to use these measurable objectives, activities, and expected outcomes to develop an implementation timeline for each activity. And this implementation timeline will include the projected duration of each activity and the names and titles of individuals responsible for each activity. And Part C here, we ask you to note that sections in the project abstract do correspond to the minimum required elements of the grant, as specified in the application guidelines, and to each of the optional priority elements. Down at Part 6 in the project abstract, there are 3 tables. The first table applies to implementation expansion grants, and the second table applies to planning grants. There's a third table also that applies to both types of grants. In your narrative, you're also going to include a sustainability plan. Here you will describe how the program outlined in the application would be sustained beyond the funding timeline of this grant. This should include sustainment of the provider and LEA partnerships. The provider can be an IHE or an alternative provider. It should include sustainment of financial support for residents and sustainment of ongoing mentorship and support of these residents once they have completed the program and they have their certificates. This ongoing support can be both for future cohorts of residency program participants and for those who complete the residency experience during grant-funded years as they go on to take positions in LEAs. An additional part of the narrative is the program evaluation. In the program evaluation, you will identify benchmarks for each goal, objective, activity, and expected outcome. Each partnership will identify methods that will be used to report the project results to its partners and to PDE. And they will identify how it will work, how the partnership will work together with partners to understand and use key project results to improve teaching and learning. There are 4 elements here. We ask you to design a plan to identify and document components of an effective model of a year-long clinical residency the partner institutions and other preparation programs will be able to implement, and that's intended to lead to the filling of critical vacancies in high-need LEAs. Part B, we also ask you to establish and document specific standards or benchmarks that will be used to determine the effectiveness of the program, including how teacher or principal residents perform in comparison to previous cohorts of teacher and principal candidates or residents, if applicable. So if you're building out a program and you have previous cohorts of teacher and principal candidates or residents, please provide this information. Part C, we ask you to describe and provide rationales for planned evaluation methods. And Part D, where possible, provide draft evaluation instruments. And you'll remember that that is also a separate section of the application, separate from this narrative. For program evaluation, we have an additional 3 points. We ask you to name the individual who will be responsible for the overall project evaluation. and provide documentation of the individual's qualifications. This is an internal evaluator. Part F, we ask you to describe how evaluation results will be reported to partners and to PDE. And we want you to note that anecdotal participant data and participant self-reporting are insufficient methods for measuring program effectiveness and impact. And finally, G, describe how members of the partnership will work together to understand and use key project results to inform and improve program implementation in future years. The next section of the narrative addresses a plan for dissemination of project results. We'd like you to illustrate how the partnership's processes for designing a year-long residency can be replicated by other institutions in Pennsylvania, to identify components of the partnership that will be essential for others to replicate, and to design a plan that includes channels that will be used to distribute a description. Design a plan that includes channels that will be used to distribute a description of year-long residency program processes, outcomes, and points of improvement. An additional section of the narrative is the budget narrative. In a separate section of the application, you provide your spreadsheet, your budget spreadsheet, and this is your chance to explain in narrative form the elements of your budget. So in part A, you describe the cost effectiveness of the budget, or you explain why the budget is cost effective. In part B, you connect each expenditure to relevant project goals, objectives, activities, and expected outcomes. Part C, you ensure that the budget is realistic, cost-effective, and detailed, and that it uses the following 7 categories of expenditures. Number 1, salaries. Number 2, fringe benefits. Number 3, purchased professional and technical services. Number 4, other purchased services. Number 5, supplies and materials. Number 6, travel. And number 7, indirect costs, which are limited to 8% and not to be calculated on the cost of equipment. We ask you to carefully check all budget figures and calculations and verify that the funding levels on the project abstract rider B match the totals reported on the budget projection form. A sample budget is available on the grant webpage. Carefully check all budget figures and calculations and verify that the funding level reported on the project abstract rider B is the same as the total on the budget projection forms. We'd like to alert you to common application shortcomings. The first is that the application is not responsive to the required elements as stated in the grant guidelines. We covered the required elements for both the implementation planning grants and for the implementation expansion grants and for the planning grants earlier in this presentation. Those required elements are sine qua non. The priority elements are optional, as you know. The second common shortcoming is that the application lacks sufficient detail and raises many questions. You want to provide enough detail so that your reviewer will understand your plans and will be able to evaluate the feasibility of the plans. A third application shortcoming is that the needs assessment data are not local and not current. We do urge you to ensure that you're using data from local LEAs and that those data are current. Sometimes applications do not develop the key concepts into appropriate action strategies. So we want you to be sure that you have action strategies within your grant proposal. An additional shortcoming is that application information is poorly organized, which creates barriers for the reviewer to obtain a clear idea of the plan. Another shortcoming is that instructional activities do not build on existing partnerships or work that is already underway at LEAs. For implementation and expansion grants, clearly we expect that there will be partnerships in place and that work will be underway. And even for planning grants, if you can demonstrate that you have existing partnerships, that you're building on those in your planning, and that you've got work underway that can be incorporated into your planning, that will strengthen your application. Another shortcoming can be that application information is consistent from one section to another of the grant proposal. the budgets are not cost-effective, or the budgets contain calculation errors. And finally, applications may contain typographical, grammatical, and/or syntactic errors, and we find those to be shortcomings. We hope that by bringing these to your attention, you'll avoid these shortcomings. We'll say a few words about selection of awardees. Each part of the application will be assigned a point value. Clearly, the required elements must be present, and then the priority elements will be assigned point values and weights. And a panel of raters will review the applications and assign points based on the proposal's strengths in addressing the required and priority elements. The proposal will then be scored, and high-scoring proposals that are compliant with the guidelines will be funded. Grants will be distributed to approved Commonwealth Certification Preparation Program providers. The number of awards to be made will be limited by program funds and funding priorities as stated in the grant program guidelines and here in this presentation. And of course, awards are contingent upon availability of funds. There are a number of expenses that are not allowed under this type of funding, and I'll go down through the list of unallowable or disallowed expenditures. The cost of instruction when tuition is charged to the grant, and the cost of tuition when the cost of instruction is charged to the grant. These first two unallowable expenses are essentially to prevent double dipping. The third type of unallowable expense is facilities rental or janitorial costs for any of the partners. The cost of food and beverages, other than those permitted as per diem expenses for travel, those are unallowable, as are the purchases of equipment. And now we have a definition of equipment. Under these application guidelines, equipment is an instrument, machine, apparatus, or set of articles that meets all of the following criteria. The cost is $5,000 or more per unit. The equipment retains its original shape, appearance, and character with use. The equipment does not lose its identity through fabrication or incorporation into a different or more complex unit or substance. The equipment is non-expendable, that is, if the item is damaged or some of its parts are lost or worn out, it's more feasible to repair the item than to replace it with an entirely new unit. And under normal conditions of use, including reasonable care and maintenance, it can be expected to serve its principal purpose for more than one 12-month fiscal period. That's equipment. The unallowable expenses are continued on this slide. Capital expenditures are unallowable. College or university fees such as, but not limited to, academic fees, equipment fees, computer fees, community center fees, ID fees, and health fees are not allowed. Per diem, lodging, and mileage reimbursement rates higher than the prevailing state limits, which are available at the link on this slide and in the link in front of you and on the PowerPoint presentation, those are not available, allowable. Indirect costs greater than 8% are not allowable, and also unallowable are the payment of the salary of a project director whose time in instructional activities is less than 20%. The Commonwealth reserves the right to reject all applications received under these guidelines and to negotiate separately with successful grant recipients. Applications will be rejected under the following conditions. And again, any of these conditions would lead to a rejected application. The first is that applicants are currently delinquent in filing reports either with PDE or with the comptroller's office. The second is that applications are not completed according to specifications contained in Parts 2 and 3, the Innovative Teacher and Principal Residency Program Grant Application Requirements, covered in the linked document and also covered previously in this presentation, and or the applications are not submitted by the established deadline of 5:00 p.m. on June 27th, 2018. We also need to state that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is not liable for any costs incurred by applicants or successful grant recipients prior to the effective date of any contract. We have some reporting requirements on this slide, and this you can also relate this slide to the timeline that we covered earlier. Contractors are obligated to file the following reports. I'm not going to read this whole slide to you, but the reports include the reconciliation of cash on hand, a final completion report, audit information, a progress report, and a program evaluation. So you can see the due dates for those reports and the office with which the reports must be filed. Many of them come to the issuing office, which is my office. For auditing purposes, project staff must maintain time and effort sheets or similar reporting mechanisms to document time devoted to project activities. After the grant proposals have been received and evaluated, each applicant will be notified in writing about the status of the application. And we also want to let you know that copies of each evaluator's written evaluation will be provided to applicants. There are rules surrounding media releases. Media releases and/or press statements pertaining to contracts awarded under these guidelines cannot be made without written authorization from the issuing office and must conform to the guidelines provided by the issuing office. I'll remind you that questions were submitted in writing before this pre-proposal webinar, and I'll address these questions and supply answers as a part of this webinar. The question and answer document will also be posted to the grant website, along with a recording of the webinar and a transcription of the recording. Before I move to the questions from the field, however, I'm going to finish out the presentation slides. I'll point you to some additional resources for grant proposal development, and these include Pennsylvania's ESSA Consolidated State Plan, which is posted to the Pennsylvania Department of Education's website. They include the text of Title II, Part A of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and that's posted to a federal government website. And the non-regulatory guidance for Title II, Part A, called Building Systems of Support for Excellent Teaching and Leading, published by the U.S. Department of Education in September of 2016, also posted to the U.S. Department of Education website. In the set of PowerPoint slides, these are active links to those resources. I'll let you know, too, the address of the issuing office. The issuing office is the sole point of contact in the Commonwealth for these guidelines. That's the Pennsylvania Department of Education, Office of Post-Secondary and Higher Education, Bureau of School Leadership and Teacher Quality, Pennsylvania Department of Education, 333 Market Street, Harrisburg, PA, 171260333. And all inquiries and questions should be addressed to me. My name is Stephanie Stauffer. I'm a higher education associate. My phone number is 717-783-6763, and my email address is sstauffer, that's SSTAUFFER @pa.gov. I'll now turn to the question and answer document, which means that I'm going to stop sharing this set of slides, and I am going to share a different document. So this is taking me just a second. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to share my document that contains the questions from the field. And we'll see if my document will appear. I'm going to share screen. And there we are. Okay. So these are the questions submitted in advance of the pre-proposal webinar with the responses from the Pennsylvania Department of Education. There are 40 questions here, and I'm going to go through each one of them, and that then will conclude our presentation today. So this document is also posted to the Department of Education's grant website. And there will be an addendum that addresses a number of questions that were asked in advance for which we still need to complete some research by the time of this webinar. The first question is an important one. I mean, they're all important questions, but this one is very important. It asks, must we follow the PDE guidelines for the residency certificate? And the answer is no. The Pennsylvania Residency Certificate is a state law certification option that is separate and apart from the implementation of the residency programs and models permissible under ESSA. Residency, as referred to in the grant guidelines, is a full-year mentored student teaching or principal intern experience. You can see pages 2 and following of the guidelines. And you can also refer to Pennsylvania's Every Student Succeeds Act Consolidated State Plan, page 73, and the plan is linked there in the answer to that question. Question number 2, what does PDE mean by expert mentor teacher? Will the usual cooperating teacher requirements suffice, that is, 3 years satisfactory certified teaching experience on the appropriate certificate and 1 year of certified experience in the specific placement? The answer is, according to page 6 of the grant guidelines, mentors must at a minimum meet the Pennsylvania School Code requirements for supervising teachers. And you can refer to the Pennsylvania Code, Title 22, Chapter 354.25F2. These standard requirements for the cooperating teacher are minimum requirements. Grant applications may propose additional requirements. The law related to residency requires use of effective educators, and PDE is engaged in producing an operational definition of the ineffective educator under Pennsylvania's ESSA Consolidated State Plan. Question 3, is full year defined? Can we adjust the schedule to allow for 1 day per week on-campus class? Can we adjust the schedule to allow for a 1 day per week on-campus class or symposium during the first semester of the residency? The answer is that a full year of clinical practice teaching or leading alongside an expert mentor, teacher, or principal school leader is required. The full year can be carried out as a single school year or distributed across more than 1 school year, according to page 6 of the grant guidelines. If schedule adjustments are made to reduce the number of hours per week in a given semester that the candidate is in residence, those resident hours must be recovered at some other time. Many residency program models involve evening, weekend, and summer coursework. Question number 4. For principals, is the grant intended for current novice assistant principals and principals, or participants to earn their principal certificate while enrolled in the 1 year clinical experience? The intention of the principal residency, this is the answer, the intention of the principal residency is for participants to earn their principal certificate while enrolled in the 1 year clinical experience. We have another question for principals. Does the residency program have to be embedded in the IHE's or alternative providers principal prep program, or can it be an experience separate from the certification program? The answer is that the principal residency program must be embedded in the IHE's or alternative providers principal preparation program. The 2016 non-regulatory guidance for the use of Title II Part A funds for 1 year clinical residency programs under ESSA states, and this is on page 8, that school leader residency programs must, for at least 1 academic year, provide prospective principals or other school leaders with sustained and rigorous clinical learning in an authentic school setting, evidence-based coursework to the extent the state determines in consultation with LEAs that evidence is reasonably available, ongoing support from an effective mentor principal or school leader, substantial leadership responsibilities, and an opportunity to practice and be evaluated in a school setting. And the reference into ESSA, ESEA, or as reauthorized under ESSA is provided in the answer to the question. Question 6. The chart on page 9 of the grant guidelines indicates that funds expire on September 30th, 2019. Does that mean we must spend all funds allocated for the grant by that date? So if we include mentor training or inclusion activities that would span the implementation year, 2019-2020, we would have to spend it by September 30th, 2019. The answer to this question is yes. All grant-funded activities under this grant must be completed by September 30th, 2019, and any goods to be purchased under the grant must be ordered by that date. Question 7. We were thinking about applying for an implementation grant, but would not be able to implement in the 2018-2019 academic year. What does an evaluation report look like prior to implementation if we do not implement until 2019-2020? The answer is that the implementation expansion grants are for implementation and expansion in academic year 2018-2019. The planning grant would be more appropriate for the situation described here. Planning grant recipients will receive priority consideration for implementation and expansion grants in future years, subject to availability of funding. Question 8. We have questions about the application of some of the requested elements to the submission of a planning grant. For many of the specified elements, am I to provide answers about how we will plan to address the element, as well as provide potential options? For instance, 3E states describe the incentives and flexibilities that will be incorporated to encourage candidates to participate in these programs. I expect our planning efforts will lead to specification about the incentives and flexibility, but without planning, I likely lack the desired level of specificity. The answer is yes. For a planning grant, provide answers about how you will plan to address the element, and also provide potential options. Reviewers will understand that the goal of the grant is to plan a residency program, so not all pieces are expected to be in place. However, they will expect the applicants to have some idea of the direction in which they wish to proceed. Question number 9. Are there elements that the reviewers will not expect that planning grant submissions necessarily address? For instance, 3M requests syllabi for the residency coursework. I anticipate that our planning efforts would contribute to a collaborative construction of these syllabi. Or would the committee expect the planning submissions to submit these completed syllabi? For a planning grant, the answer is supply existing materials such as syllabi to the extent that you can or wish to. You may indicate where coursework, materials, agreements, and so on will require revision or new development. Question 10. Can you provide a list of LEAs that will qualify as high-need LEAs under the terms of the Residency Grant Proposal Guidelines? The answer is according to page 5 of the Grant Proposal Guidelines. A high-need LEA means an LEA with schools that 1. Have high rates of minority students or high rates of students in poverty, or 2. Can demonstrate chronic multiple teacher shortages in special education, STEM subjects, which are science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or other state-identified or local shortage areas. And I will point out that we supplied this definition earlier in this presentation. So under number 1, high need relating to high rates of minority students or high rates of students in poverty, you can visit PDE's enrollment reports and projections page and look at the Public School Enrollments 2016-2017 file, which is linked here. This contains enrollment data by LEA and by race and ethnicity, as reported by Pennsylvania LEAs in PIMS, the Pennsylvania Information Management System. You may also check out PDE's loan cancellation low income page and look at the file, the 2016-2017 Public Schools Percent Low Income file, linked here in this document, and that contains percentages of students in Pennsylvania schools who come from low-income families listed by LEA and by school. Low income in this case is defined by the federal government under the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA. For identifying LEAs that are high need relating to teacher shortages, the subject area shortages and the LEAs identified by Pennsylvania as having teacher shortages within those subject areas are listed in this in a document titled Teacher Shortage Areas Nationwide Listing for 1990-1991 through 2017-2018, published in May of 2017 by the U.S. Department of Education. This document can be accessed via a link on the U.S. Department of Education's teacher shortage page, and that link is provided here in this document as well as in the PowerPoint slides associated with the presentation. The areas identified in this document are still in effect. Today is June 11th, 2018, and the May 2017 document areas are still in effect. We want to remind you that grant applicants may document local needs in support of proposed partners and local shortage areas that are not identified on these lists. Question 11, can a new assistant principal position be funded out of this grant, assuming that these funds are above our normal Title II allocation? The answer to that is no. Question 12, how do school districts get to volunteer for this program? Are we able to apply for this opportunity as well? The answer is that a certification preparation program provider, that is a college, a university, or an alternative provider, must be the primary grant applicant, and these must be Pennsylvania providers. We encourage representatives of interested LEAs to approach institutions that place student teachers and/or principal interns in their schools to propose a partnership for this grant opportunity. Question 13. Are full-time residency programs for principals a possibility with the grant? The answer is yes. One goal of the grant is to implement and expand and/or develop models for principal residency programs. Question 14. Is this an application for both pieces, planning and implementation, or is it split over 2 years? Say we wanted to apply for the planning grant and then apply for the implementation grant once the plan is set. Is that acceptable, or is all of the money being awarded at once? The answer is that this is planned to be the first of a multi-year grant program. Approximately $2 million will be awarded this year. Planning grant recipients will receive priority consideration for implementation and expansion grants in future years, subject to the availability of funding. Question 15. Can we apply for both planning and implementation at the same time? The answer is yes, an institution may apply for both the planning and the implementation grant at the same time. For example, a partnership may wish to expand existing residency programs and plan additional residency programs. This may, for example, happen in an area where an existing residency program is being carried out at the post-baccalaureate level, and the institution wants to build that out, but also plan to implement at the undergraduate level. Question 16. Does your definition of school leader include assistant and/or vice principals? For example, would an assistant principal residency program be eligible for this grant? This relates to Guidelines Section 2. The answer is that PDE does not offer an assistant principal certificate. The candidate in a principal residency program may be placed in an assistant principal or vice principal field experience. This type of placement is eligible for the grant. Question 17. Application guidelines state on page 4, priority will be given to residency models embedded in 4-year undergraduate teacher preparation programs. Question, would you please elaborate on the specific nature of this priority? Will post-baccalaureate programs be competitively scored or reviewed differently than undergraduate programs? Relating to the Guidelines Section 3.1.1. The answer is that proposals for undergraduate programs will receive extra points. Post-baccalaureate instructional programs can be competitive based on the quality with which the required elements and priority elements are addressed within the proposal. Principal preparation programs are offered only at the post-baccalaureate level, and clearly we are targeting principal preparation programs in these grant guidelines. Question 18. For a planning grant, does develop strategies for embedding a full year of clinical residency experience for teacher candidates within their 4-year preparation program by the 2019-20 academic year apply to incoming freshmen in 2019-20 or for current undergraduate teacher candidates who will student teach in 2019-20? This relates to Guidelines Section 3.1.1. The answer to this question is that the intent for the planning grant is to build a path that will implement the candidate's residency, that is, the student teaching, in 2019-2020. Question 19. Can we submit more than one planning grant, one for teachers and one for principals? Alternately, can we include teacher and principal residencies within the same planning grant? The answer is that an eligible program provider may submit more than one planning grant proposal. Teacher and principal residency model planning may be combined within a single grant proposal. Number 20, can pre-service teachers receive a stipend for living expenses? This relates to Guidelines Section 321. The answer is yes, residents may receive a stipend for living expenses. Question 21. Who must be high need, a school within a district or an entire district? Relating to Guidelines Section 321. The answer is that the applicant may identify a district or a school within a district as high need. Question 22. Do planning grants need an LEA partner, or can securing that partner constitute a deliverable? This relates to Guidelines Section 321. The answer is that planning grants must include at least one LEA partner at the time of application. Securing additional partners may constitute proposed deliverables. Question 23. Is an external evaluator needed for the planning grant? The answer to this question is no, an external evaluator is not needed for a planning grant. I will add that planning grants must address how the activities that are planned will be evaluated, but there is not a need to have an external evaluator. An internal evaluator will be sufficient. Question number 24. Do participants have to give back some number of years of service in proportion to the stipend or tuition they receive? This relates to Guidelines Section 322. The answer is that participants are not required to give back some number of years of service in proportion to the stipend or tuition they receive under Title II, Part A state set-aside funding. However, an applicant may build such a requirement into a proposal. Question 25. What is the appropriate compensation for members of a planning grant work group? This relates to Guidelines Section 322. The answer is that compensation must be set based upon local institutional requirements and supported within the budget narrative. Question 26. Can classroom mentors be paid directly for their participation? This relates to Guidelines Section 322. The answer is yes, classroom mentors may be paid directly for their participation. Question 27. Can the $75,000 planning grant pay for LEAs to travel to other districts that have pipeline residencies in place in order to learn and observe best practices? This relates to Key Application Elements, Planning Grant 3.3. The answer to this question is yes. The planning grant funds may be used to pay for LEAs to travel to other districts that have pipeline residencies in place in order to learn and observe best practices. Question number 28. Can the planning grant pay for external consultants from existing residency programs to assist with the development of another internally administered district-specific program? This relates to Key Application Elements, Planning Grant 3.3. The answer to this question is yes. The planning grant funds may be used to pay for external consultants from existing residency programs to assist with the development of another internally administered district-specific program. Question 29. Is the grant only for LEAs that have no principal pipeline program in any form? For example, if an LEA currently collaborates with an external vendor to run a principal pipeline program, is the LEA still eligible for this grant in order to create an additional program? This relates to Guidelines Section 331. The answer is the principal grant is not intended only for LEAs that have no principal pipeline program in any form. Existing programs may be expanded. New programs may be implemented at sites where existing programs are in operation. Question number 30. Can a district or LEA apply for a separate teacher and principal grant in the same application cycle? A program provider partnering with a district or LEA may apply for separate teacher and principal grants in the same application cycle, each to be operated with the same district and or LEA. Question number 31. This is in two parts. Part A, the question is, can an LEA have various institutions of higher ed or alternative providers as partners to support multiple grants? For example, can one school district partner with several separate universities, such as, say, Temple, Drexel, and the University of Pennsylvania, to implement multiple residency programs? In this example, can each university get their own grant to cover the cost of residencies? The answer to this question is yes. An LEA may have various IHEs and/or alternative providers as partners to support multiple grants, and each IHE partner or alternative provider partner may have its own grant. Part B to this question is, if yes, and it was yes, will consideration go to the 3 IHEs or alternative providers for the implementation grant in the following year? This relates to Guidelines Section 331. The answer to Part B of the question is yes. Each IHE or alternative provider partner will be among the group given priority for the implementation grant the following year based on the availability of funds. Question number 32. Does the full-year clinical residency need to apply to current undergraduate students who will complete student teaching in 2019-2020, or to be embedded into the program for incoming freshmen in 2019-2020? This relates to the Guidelines Section 332. The answer to this question is that the intent for the planning grant is to build a path that will implement the candidate's residency, that is, the student teaching, in 2019-2020. Question number 33. Does the full-year residency need to be full-time in 2 semesters? For example, could teacher candidates return to campus for a half day, 2 days a week during 1 semester? This relates to Guidelines Section 332. The answer is that a full year of clinical practice teaching or leading alongside an expert mentor teacher or principal or school leader is required. The full year can be carried out as a single school year or distributed across more than 1 school year, according to page 6 of the grant guidelines. If schedule adjustments are made to reduce the number of hours per week in a given semester that the candidate is in residence, those resident hours must be recovered at some other time. Many residency program models involve evening, weekend, and summer coursework. Question number 34. Does sustainability and/or in-kind support need to be addressed in the proposal for the planning grant? This relates to Guidelines Section 332. The answer is that sustainability must be addressed in the planning grant. In-kind support is not required under the terms of the grant, but is encouraged. Question number 35. Can a part-time or full-time IHE and/or alternative provider administrator lead a planning grant, or must the administrator be a faculty member? This relates to Guidelines Section 332 and 4.5. The answer is that an IHE or alternative provider administrator, part-time or full-time, may lead a planning grant. Question 36. For a planning project, do the objectives we identify on the project abstract pertain to the development of the plan itself or the objectives that we intend to achieve through implementation of the plan? This relates to requirements, page 1. The answer is that the project abstract document presents required elements and priority elements for the planning grant, beginning on page 6. Provide objectives that relate to developing the plan and also provide objectives relating to the content of the plan. That is, the proposed plan's outcome to the extent feasible. For example, a submitter may know which certification subject areas and which LEAs have been identified in a needs analysis, and so certain goals that the plan will address can already be described. Question number 37. This is in 2 parts. Part A, we're interested in applying for the planning grant. Can you clarify whether or not we're permitted to plan to apply for the 2nd year of funding? In other words, are we planning to seek an implementation grant the following year? Or is the planning grant meant to assist us in planning a clinical residency that derives its financial support from other sources? So the answer to Part A is this round of funding pays for planning or implementation and expansion activities to take place during the 2018-2019 academic year. An institution that receives a planning grant this year will be prioritized for an implementation grant funding in the next round, i.e. next year and in the future. Future funding will be applied for in a separate application process that is not available at this time. And Part B of the question is, can the recruitment effort for diverse candidates permit a 2-year sequence in which the clinical residency occurs during the final 2nd year, not the 1st year? The answer to this question, Part B, is yes. The proposed recruitment effort may permit a 2-year recruitment sequence. The burden will be on the applicant to demonstrate how the grant proposal fulfills the requirements of the grant proposal guidelines. The guidelines do not rule out this approach. Question number 38. When is the agreement to participate form due? This relates to the guidelines section 3.4, and the form is linked in the question. The answer is that this form is due to PDE as part of the application package, and the application package is due to PDE by 5:00 p.m. on June 27th, 2018. That is to be sent to the issuing office, or my office, by email. Question 39, can we add LEAs to our plan after the submission date? The answer to this question is yes. A program provider may add LEAs to the plan after the submission date, as long as at least one LEA partner is included in the original submission. And the final question, number 40, is can funds be used to pay stipends to cooperating teachers over and above the district's usual stipend? This relates to guidelines section 4.5. The answer to this question is yes. Funds may be used to pay stipends to cooperating teachers over and above the district's usual stipend. And we do want to point out that Title II does have a supplement, not supplant requirement. This concludes the pre-proposal questions that were submitted in advance of the pre-proposal webinar. And I'm just going to thank everybody for participating in this presentation today, for listening and accessing the webinar guidelines. What I'm going to do now is to stop sharing that particular slide, and I'm going to return to my presentation slides. I'm going to share that screen, and I'm going to post the issuing office information. Again, the issuing office is the sole point of contact in the Commonwealth for these guidelines. The address is on the screen. I read it earlier in the presentation. And to remind you that all inquiries and questions should be addressed to me, Stephanie Stauffer, at 717-783-6763, or my email address, sstauffer@pa.gov. Thank you very much.